from Harvard Business School and extensive experience in leadership positions in startups in the technology and healthcare sectors. Daphne has given numerous innovation conferences, courses, and workshops. She is a teacher and mentor through various global entrepreneurship, innovation, and executive education programs. But I take no more of her time. And Daphne, welcome, and the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Melissa, and everyone for the forum and the invitation to participate with you guys. I'm very excited to be here with you today. So to kick things off after the welcome, I wanted to tell you a little bit about what we're going to be up to today in today's session. This is what our agenda looks like. As you can see, we're going to be focused on the value proposition. But we're also going to talk about what goes around the value proposition, which starts with understanding our user, and then we'll be working through how to build out our value proposition together. I thought it might be useful to tell you a little bit about me beyond what Melissa told you, so that you know who you're going to be working with in today's workshop. So just as a way of background, I'm originally from France, but I lived in the US for many years, and my mother is from India, where I lived as well. So I'm a bit of a mix of those three countries, at least. I did my undergraduate studies at American University in Washington, DC, where I focused on international development. After that, I stayed in DC to work with the World Bank in the headquarters, mostly working with governments in Africa and institutions that worked with African countries. After that, I decided to do my MBA to get on the business side of things. And so I went to Harvard Business School and got my MBA focusing on innovation, social impact, and marketing. After the MBA in Boston is when I came to Mexico, which is where I'm based now. That was 9 years ago. And I came to Mexico to work with first a technology startup called Frog Tech, where I was director of marketing and then operations. And then another startup also in the social impact space, but in healthcare, called Sala Uno. And after those startup experiences, I decided to go to the other extreme of the spectrum and work in the corporate world. So I was innovation manager with Cinépolis, which is the third largest movie theater chain in the world, trying to bring a lot of the way that we work in startups to the corporate world. And about a year ago, I launched into my own endeavor, which is called Atrevidea. And basically what I do is work with individuals, students, entrepreneurs, small and medium enterprises and big corporates to help them do more daring and impactful innovation. So with that, I want to get right into our topic today. What does a value proposition have to do with the innovation that you guys are trying to drive? And basically what I would say is innovation is about creating and capturing value. And so the value proposition guides and reflects that. And that's why it's valuable and super important to focus on it, okay? What is a value proposition? I would say it's a company telling the customer the number one reason that the product or the service, whatever it might be, is right for that particular customer. Why is this strategic? Because every customer has options. Every customer is making purchasing decisions based on value propositions. And even if we don't explicitly define it, the client or customer is associating us with a certain value proposition. And if we do define it, then we can work on it, take care of it, and improve it. And it can become a differentiator that improves our business results. So on all fronts, it is pretty strategic to have your value proposition nailed down. The number one reason, as you probably know, that startups and businesses in general fail is that there is no market need, or maybe said in a different way, they don't find the fit with the market. And that's according to CB Insights, which is always researching that, this topic. And they find that 42% of businesses fail for that reason. So that's the number one reason. The second one is often a lack of funds. And then in third place, we've got a lack of chemistry and teamwork between the employees or the founders. So clearly not finding and responding to a need in the market, which has to be with your value proposition, is a huge problem with startups and endeavors. And so we have to get around this if we don't want to be one of these statistics, basically. All right. So before we define our value proposition, we have to understand the customer. If you don't start by understanding the customer, then you're designing a value proposition based on opinions and assumptions, and that can be dangerous and put you right back into that statistic of companies that just didn't find a fit with the market. So how well do you know and understand your customer? I would love to see in the chat from those of you that are here on the web call, if you can put me on a scale of 0 to 10, how well would you say that you know and understand your customer? 0, not at all, and 10, completely. And let's be honest and see what we have here. I've got the first few responses. Thank you for that. And I'm just going to see what else we've got here. Okay. Got a lot of 7s. That seems to be a popular answer. A very honest 6, which I appreciate. And our max for now seems to be in the 8 category. All right. Thank you so much for sharing that. I'm paying attention to the last few responses coming in here. So I get worried when companies or entrepreneurs tell me, we know our customer 100%, we don't need to go and check in with them, we're good to go, because that's pretty much never the case. And even in big organizations that have been around for a while, that have been working with their customer for sometimes decades, I often find that when we dig into this topic, they still need to get to know their customer better for a couple of reasons. One of which is your customer continues to evolve. So even if you knew them at some point, or if you checked in with them at some point, it doesn't mean you're done. You should probably continue to kind of take the pulse and be close to your customer, because you'll always learn something and discover something that you can use then in building and improving your value proposition. Okay, so how can I understand the customer? The answer is getting close to them, right? You're not going to find the answer in a book. You're going to find it directly with the customer. I love this quote from Steve Blank, which is, there are no facts inside your building, so get out of the building, right? Steve Blank, as you probably know, is a Silicon Valley entrepreneur. And so what he's trying to say here is, if you stay at your desk and you stay in your meeting room with your work colleagues, you think you know everything about your customer, but beyond that building, beyond the door, that's where the answers are. That's where you're going to find out what your customer really cares about, what they're going through, and then do something about it. Okay, so let's get out there. Now, how do we get out there? There's lots of types of information that we can collect about our user. Some of them are very qualitative, some of them are very quantitative, some of them are very broad, some of them are very deep. I'm showing you a little bit of a sample here of the things that you could be doing to get information from your user. I think a lot of you are probably already using things like databases and survey. We tend to have a bias towards broad and quantitative information because we think that's the most valuable information. And so a lot of times in innovation, we tend to look more at the qualitative and deep information as something that we're missing, and that could probably get us to some pretty good information. So I'm going to briefly touch on some of these points, starting with the most basic one, which is, sorry about that, experts and existing data, right? So all of you should be doing this. I think this is pretty basic, but yeah, you should be talking to experts in your space, reporters, scholars, professors, company leaders, opinion leaders, and then looking at existing data, right? Articles, books, databases, documentaries, whatever, about your topic. You should be absorbing all the information that already exists out there, because that's going to be a shortcut to you getting information, right? Now, that being said, I consider this pretty basic, because that information is not going to be super deep in most cases, and is not going to be exactly about your user. So I highly recommend you start here and then very quickly move on to some other methods. So let me tell you about some methods that are a little bit more alternative and that maybe you're not using. One of them is immersion, getting into the context of your user. These photos that you're seeing here are real. They're from an innovation project that I worked on in Sala Uno, the healthcare clinic that I told you about. They specialize in ophthalmology, so eye care. Many of our patients were low vision or even blind. And so we wanted to see, what does it feel like to go through our institution, our clinics, our hospitals with those challenges? And as you can see, we really put ourselves into that perspective as much as we could, and went through the experience. We discovered so many things that we had never realized before by living it from the perspective of the user. So how close can you get to living the experience of your user? Now, of course, there are limitations to this. I'm not going to get my eyes operated on just to have empathy for my users and know what it feels like, right? My empathy has limits. But what I did do in this project is accompany patients through the process of getting their surgery, And I almost was there in the OR, holding their hands. I was a few steps away just to make sure that I wasn't, contaminating anything, but I was there and I was observing everything that was going on through this immersion and paying attention to, here they're worried, here they have no clue what's happening, here they just want to go home and we're not letting them, here they'd like their family member to be there, but for some reason we've separated them even though there's no need, etc. So a lot of interesting perspective comes from immersing ourselves into the context of our user. The next tool that you can use, and sometimes is an alternative when for some reason you can't be there in the context of your user or live it yourself, is what I call digital evidence. So this is asking your user for evidence, right? Take a picture of your route to work, register the most stressful moment of your day, document your favorite part of the day, take a video of the process of making an appointment with our clinic, and send me that evidence. I can't be there with you and I can't live the experience myself for some reason, maybe because we're in a global pandemic, that's a pretty good reason. So send me evidence because I want to see and feel and absorb what it's like for you. And I'll probably notice so many things that I won't notice if I just ask you your opinion, right? So just imagine you're delivering packages to your customers. That's one of the points in the experience. And you imagine how the package arrives. Ask your users, send me a picture of what the package looks like when you open it. And maybe everything is completely mixed up and crushed and completely different from this vision that you have, that you're imagining of the experience of your user, right? So ask for that evidence from the perspective of your user. And last but not least, I would say my favorite tool to get to know your user before you really develop your value proposition are ethnographic interviews. Ethnography basically means going really deep into a person's motivations, values, understanding of the world in order to understand them, right? These images that you're seeing here are, again, real images from the Sala Uno project that I was telling you about. We interviewed these people, right, patients, and you can see there's a big variety of people, young people, older people, men, women, people who came by themselves, people who came accompanied, because we're trying to get just a wide perspective on what is it like to be a patient with our hospitals and clinics. Another example of when I did this would be in Cinepolis. These are pictures of the people that we interviewed for a VIP project. We were trying to figure out how to make the VIP experience even more VIP, right? And as you can see, again, there's a variety of people here. And in fact, if you can tell, some of these weren't in person, they were video calls, because some of these people are in Dubai, in India, in the US. And unfortunately for me, the company didn't fly me around the world just for one-off interviews. So we did them via video conference, and that can work beautifully, right? What you do during these interviews is you ask really deep questions, okay? So you're doing these by one-on-one conversations so that you can ask questions that you would never ask in a survey because people would not answer them. But here there's a trust that's set up in this conversation, and you can ask things like, what's the most frustrating thing about losing your vision? What are you most stressed about, when you're in the OR? Why do you go to VIP cinemas instead of regular cinemas? And people, instead of just checking a box or giving you a one-word answer on a survey, they're going to tell you all about their lives. And there's really, really good information that's going to come out of that will then turn into gold for you, literally, because you'll be able to fully understand that person and start designing solutions for them. So I highly recommend, even if you launch surveys and you send them to 300 people and you get all these data points, do some interviews, do some one-on-one interviews, just a few of them, because you're going to get some really good, deep, qualitative information that you will never get from a survey. Okay, so that's step one. Your initial questions about the problem is, who is your client and what problem do they have, obviously, that you are interested in solving. Okay, so that's the reason why you need to get close to your user and check in with them. Even if you feel like you know them really well and you're at an 8, keep checking in with them with some of these methods that we just talked about. And then there's a tool that you'll probably find useful that we use a lot, which is this map, right? About understanding your customer. Sometimes called an empathy map, sometimes called the jobs to be done map, whatever you want to call it. But this framework is pretty useful. It's got 3 sections, as you can see. The first section is around jobs to be done, as they're called. So jobs, we don't mean what is their day job, right? Where they're getting their salary from, not at all. We mean, what is the customer trying to achieve or obtain in life in general, right? Related to your topic, obviously, okay? So if I'm thinking about a 20-year-old young woman, maybe her biggest job right now in her life is graduating from university with good grades and as quickly as possible. Okay, that could be a job. If I am thinking about the user being a mom in her 40s with 2 kids, maybe one of the big jobs in her life is making sure that her kids are healthy and happy. Very different job because these people are very different, right? So again, it depends on your user, and you should figure out what are the things that they are caring the most about getting done. Okay, so that's the jobs. Then we look at the pains. Pains are things that right now are making those jobs difficult, right? Things that are negative, risky, painful, time consuming, costly, whatever it might be, and that make it literally a pain to try to get those jobs done. And then on the other end, we've got gains. Gains are the opposite. They're things that make their jobs easier, right? Not their actual work jobs, but their jobs in life. Okay. So things that make them happy, make them feel successful, make them feel like they're making progress on their jobs, and would create kind of a plus or a wow if they have them. Okay. So this framework is super useful. Let me give you an example or two. Here's an example. Imagine that our customer or our user was a small local shop. Here I'm identifying the customer job. So I've got, okay, yeah, this person is trying to sell their goods, identify customer needs, order goods, do marketing, and provide discounts. Those are the kind of the big things that they're trying to do in their life. What are the pains around that? They're not really sure how they're doing in sales. They don't know kind of how much a customer is worth. They don't know what their customers prefer. They feel like they're offering a million things at very high cost. And they lose sometimes money because some things don't get sold or taken care of. And then on the gain side, they love being able to surprise their customers, give personalized discounts, and have a better relationship with their customers. Okay. So I'm not talking about everything in this small local shop owner's life. I'm talking about related to this business that they're running. What are their jobs, gains, and pains? Another example of a direct consumer. If I was a grocery store, I would look at this grocery customer and say, yeah, okay, this person is trying to manage their money, plan their meals, buy food, and sometimes maybe buy gifts. What's painful? Long lines, needing help, not finding items, and not being sure what's on sale. What's a gain for them? Having access to more items, having quality, the convenience, and maybe getting some rewards or points. Okay, so just to give you a sense of how we fill out this map. So what we're going to do now is I'm going to share with you a template that I've prepared for you. You can go ahead and use this link to access it, or you can scan the QR code depending on what devices you're in, and you'll find a Google Doc that you can go ahead and copy and make your own, or you can download it directly and fill it out offline. And you're going to see that the first thing it has is this empathy map, or this user persona, or this jobs to be done framework, however you want to call it. And I want to give you a few minutes to think about how you would fill yours out. One of the easier ways is to put little text boxes or Post-its basically on it. And I'm going to put in the chat the full link as well, in case you want to grab it from the chat. I'm going to give you a few minutes to think and work through that. Okay. And then we're going to see if you have any questions or doubts about this framework. If you already have a question or doubt right now, just by taking a first look at it, go ahead and let me know. You can unmute yourself and just go for it, or you can put it in the chat, whatever is more comfortable for you. And we're going to just take a few minutes to take a look at this framework and see if there's any questions.
Hi, Daphne.
Hi.
This is Jessica. Loving it so far. I have a question for you, and is that when you talk about, asking your customers or potential customers to provide feedback or to just share what they are, dreaming about, experiences, the favorite part of the day, how do you incentivize them for them to provide that precisely?
Fantastic question, Jessica. So when I do interviews, the ethnographic interviews, the last tool that I showed you, 90% of the time, I don't put any incentive. Why? Because they don't need it. people are super happy to talk about themselves and to kind of have a moment where they're the star and all we care about is them. And so usually people are super excited to chat about themselves with me, and I really don't need to put an incentive. I've done it in very many contexts with startups, with big corporations. And so I usually just send some sort of communication, or I get in touch with customers directly and say, we would love to talk to you about your current situation and what's going on with you. It'll take 20 minutes, 30 minutes. Realistically, sometimes it takes 40 minutes, but by that time they're so engaged in the conversation that I'm the one who has to shut down the conversation. So I say 20 to 30 minutes so that I don't scare them off. And usually I get more responses than I can handle. And so at some point I have to say, thanks, we're good to go. We have enough people that we talk to. I don't want to do hundreds of interviews either. So I think you'll be surprised. This is my point here. Most people are super excited to talk about themselves, and they feel really good that the company or the entrepreneur or whatever it might be cares enough to check in with them. And I really do put them on a pedestal when I'm doing this. And I say, you're the expert, you know everything, we know nothing, we just want to learn from you. And people really enjoy participating in that kind of dynamic. Now, sometimes what I do is I put a little kind of thank you at the end of it, but I usually don't have to advertise that ahead of it. So but at the end of the interview, I'll say, thank you so much for your time. We just wanted to give you a little thank you, but I don't make that the reason why they're participating. Also, because I don't really want to bias them, right? So it depends on some dynamics. Maybe you want to make it a little bit more fun and interactive. And so you want to put a little prize, or put them what some people do a lot is putting them into a raffle. So you only have to give one prize, but everyone felt like they participated and got a chance to win it. So there's a couple of tactics there, but in general, don't worry too much about the fact that people feel like they need to be paid for the time that they're giving you. Most people enjoy the experience, and I usually get the feedback of, thank you so much for asking me. I really appreciate that you guys are a company who pays attention and who cares about what I'm going through. That's the feedback that I usually get from that ask.
Yeah, I think I've got the same feedback, but I was thinking more about the digital evidence that you showed us, because one thing is just sharing with you my thoughts, and another thing is, taking a picture, send it to you, sharing my phone number. I don't know, it's more probably personal. And just to follow up. Yeah.
Sorry, Jessica. It depends what the communication channel already is. A lot of us these days are using WhatsApp with our customers, right? And if you are, it's really not a big ask to say, can you send me a picture of what the package looked like when it arrived? Like, that's not a big deal. I'm happy to do that. You really don't need to incentivize me to do that. Now, not everyone will participate, but some of them will, right? You had a follow-up.
Yes, thanks. About the sample. Thinking about numbers, when you want to go and just start interviewing people. I mean, as you said, you can have, a bunch of it. How can you, and I know there might be not that, specific answer to this, but how do you know when to stop? 10 people, 20 people, 100 people?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question. And I see that Pilar had the same question, so I'm glad you brought it up. What I want you guys to think about is, this is not quantitative research. In this case, we are not trying to get a statistically significant sample size, even though that has a good place in the quantitative work. This is qualitative research. And so there's no magic number. And the surprising thing is, with very few conversations, you get so much information. So in a survey, with the magic numbers we sometimes hear is 300. That's a good solid sample size. Okay, fine. But in qualitative research, in many of my projects, I do between 10 and 15 interviews, and I'm saturated with so much information that I don't want to do any more interviews after that. I need to process everything that I got. The only thing I can tell you, because there's no magic number, is after a while, you start hearing the same answers over and over again. And then you know that you're probably good to go and you can work with the information that you got. So that's kind of the little tell that helps you say, okay, let me stop here, because in this last interview, I almost didn't want to write anything down because everything they told me I've heard 5 times before. Let's stop here. Okay.
Great, thanks.
All right. Okay, so let me move forward because we've got a lot of ground to cover. For the template, as I mentioned, you can go ahead and download it or copy it, and then you can make it your own. Okay, this is just the one that everybody has, but go ahead and grab it so that you can do your own thing. Okay, the next question that you need to ask yourself is, how do you solve the problem in a unique and valuable way? So now we're going to go ahead and look at the solution part. Okay, so the beauty of this canvas that I'm showing you is that I actually was cheating and I only showed you half of it. It's got 2 parts. So you just filled in or looked at the right side. There's a left side, and here it is. So the left side is all about your solution. Okay, and the beauty of this canvas is that it brings the 2 together and makes sure that there's a fit. Okay, so on the right side, we've understood who is this person, what do they care about, what are they struggling with, what would make them happy, etc. And now, only now, do we say, okay, and what are we going to do about it? So on the left side of this canvas, we've got a couple things. You've got pain relievers. How are you going to relieve the pain that your users are going through? How are you going to alleviate specific customer pains that you've identified, right? You could either eliminate them completely or reduce them. It depends, but it's things that are annoying your customer and preventing them from doing the job that they want to do. How are you going to help them kind of alleviate that? On the other side, we've got gain creators. What are you going to do to create those gains and those wows? Wow. So ways that you could amplify those gains and produce those positive outcomes and benefits that your customer expects or desires or wishes or would be surprised by, right? And it can be all kinds of different gains. It could be things that are functional, things that are social, things that are emotional. All of that is valid. And then last but not least, we've got the products and services. So this is where we list exactly what are we going to offer to do the customer job, right? And we're going to map that out. Again, it has to be a fit. And the reason we use this canvas is to make sure that we're not just putting a whole bunch of products and services and features and benefits that the user doesn't care about. That would be the tragedy of not finding a market need for what we're selling. So that's why we kind of force this mechanism of, let's see if we actually have a fit here, right? And same thing, if we see a pain or a gain that we're not addressing, can we do something to address it? Maybe? Can we think about something that we could add that we're missing? So let me go back to those examples that we looked at and show you the other half. Here is the small local shop. So we already figured out who is the small local shop owner. And now when I think about my value proposition, I think, yeah, okay, what we're trying to offer is a thing that I'm going to call the cute CRM. So a customer relationship management tool for small local shops. And it's going to relieve pains by having information about customer. It's going to provide a customer overview. It's going to have a sell now option. It's going to have an option to see your low sales goods and an option to see customers' shipping history. So it's going to deal with a lot of those pains that we found. Then I'm going to create gains by allowing us to register customer preferences and kind of have a feature of you might miss this at home, a gift for you, discounts only for you. So those kinds of things that I know that my customer would appreciate and is trying to do, I'm going to put that in there. In the grocery side, look at this example. We have the grocery shopper, and then we think, okay, yeah, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to provide pain relievers through friendly service, a price lookup option when they're looking for that piece of information, and a self-checkout. And in the gain creators, I'm going to have the delivery option, I'm going to have curbside pickup, and I'm going to have mobile apps that they can do all of this through while they're on the go. Products or services, obviously the groceries, but I'm also going to put in a rewards plan and a discounts option so that they are feeling like I'm helping them deal with those jobs that they are trying to get done. Okay, so this second half of the canvas has to link up beautifully and seamlessly to your other half. So let's go ahead and take a look at that. A little secret for you. I have this template for you ready. I was just hiding it. So the second slide, if you remove the box that's hiding it, you'll see that there's the canvas. Okay, so go ahead and take a look at it. And I'd love to see, while you're taking a look, do we have any questions or comments on this value proposition canvas? Any questions from anyone? It's either incredibly clear or we have no clue what we're talking about. Anna, tell us, what do you think?
I'm actually trying to download this new template.
Okay, if you downloaded the document before, the full document, it's already there in your second slide.
Interesting, because I just browsed into my document and I couldn't find it. But anyway, I'll take
it. Just had a little box on it that you can remove, and then you'll see the second slide.
Okay. I think it's super valuable. I mean, it answers a lot of the questions that my company has at this moment, especially because we're trying to break through the market with a new solution in a new service. So we're going through this moment right now where we don't understand exactly what are the pain points of our clients. And what you said regarding quality, not quantity, it makes totally sense, because as a startup, we don't have the assets to actually, do a broader questionnaire with our clients. So it makes sense, the quality part of the process. And I think we'll be ready to implement next week to start to getting some answers.
All right, I love it. And I do want to mention something, Anna, on what you're saying. Even if you did have the resources, because I work with huge corporations that have the resources, it's not fantastic to just do quantitative research, because then you just have like, yes, no, sometimes, 3, 2. Very hard to do something with that information and actually solve problems. But if you have, they care about this, they're worried about this, they're stressed out about this, they're frustrated by this, I can work with that. I can build solutions around that. So the qualitative is always a valuable tool. Even if you could launch a 1,000 person survey, do a little bit of qualitative. I think you'll find it has huge insights.
Yeah, absolutely. It's been very
awesome.
So far.
Thank you, Anna. I have a comment from Pilar, so let me answer that. Oh, yeah, wait, is there someone else? Okay, so the question from Pilar in the chat is, the jobs are about your life, but the gains and pains are about your life or the product. So let me explain a little bit how broad or specific we should be. Basically, you need to focus in on what is important to your user, but relevant to your context, right? So a human being is a very complex person. And so I might have some worries and some stresses about my sleep quality. But if you are a customer relationship management service, maybe you're not going to go and explore that with me, because you're not going to help me sleep better. But maybe you will explore the fact that I am a freelancer with a lot of clients and I'm managing it all in Excel right now, and I'm kind of losing control. So you would do the map around the things that are relevant to you and relevant to me. So you would focus in, and your jobs, the jobs that you would map about me are, having a list of clients and getting in touch with them, following up, closing deals. Those are the kinds of jobs that I'm trying to do, and the gains and pains related to that. So even though I have other issues and jobs and things that I care about, if they're not relevant to you, you probably won't map that, because then you would have the biggest map I've ever seen in my life. Focus in on the things that are relevant to you. Just like we saw in the CRM and in the grocery store example, they focused in on just that aspect of the person, right? And same thing on the other half. You're not going to solve everything about this human being's life, but you will solve the things that are relevant to whatever, industry, product, service you are playing with. Now, if you're just getting started and you have no idea what you want to deliver to a user, then you can go a little bit more broad and say, let me map out like the key things that are important to this person in their life in general. And then maybe I'll start to say, oh yeah, this is the kind of problem that I want to solve. Cecilia.
I cannot see the second slide.
Haha, can someone confirm that they're able to see it so that I know if it's a general problem or not? Yes, okay. So the second slide, let me just go ahead and grab it and show it to everyone. Let me move it over here. There we go. Okay, this is the first slide. The second slide was hidden. And if you just go like this and delete that box, ta-da, there it is. So everybody has that. If you copied the document already, you have that wherever you copied it or downloaded it. Okay.
Oh, the thing is that for me it's view only, so I cannot do anything on the template.
Thank you, I found it.
Okay, but you need to copy it. That's why it's view only, because if not, everybody would be typing on the same document. So just copy the document and make it your own. Yeah. Okay, let's move forward. What is a value proposition then? Remember, we said it's the way that you tell your customer that you are the right option for them and for them in particular. Okay, so what it explains is how your product solves problems or improves situations, what specific benefits customers can expect, and why customers should buy from you over the competitors. It is not a slogan. So like think different from Apple is not a value proposition, right? Or a positioning statement like we are the #1 retargeting platform. That's not a value proposition, because it says nothing to the user about what you're going to do for them. Okay, so just be careful about, there's lots of other things that you can have in your marketing that might not be your value proposition. Elements of the value proposition, these are some of the things that we see the most common. So a headline, kind of the big benefit that you're offering to your customer, some sort of sub-headline or paragraph that explains a little bit more about what you're offering, to whom, and why. Sometimes we put a few bullet points of the benefits or features, not everything. You're not gonna be able to say everything in your value proposition, but the most important ones. And then some sort of visual element to kind of support and reinforce your message. What makes a good value proposition? It should be clear and easy to understand, communicate specific results that the customer can expect, explain how it's different or better, and should be able to be read or understood in 5 seconds. This is not a 20-page document explaining your value proposition to the user, okay? Here's an example from Uber. Tap the app, get a ride. Uber is the smartest way to get around. One tap and a car comes directly to you. Your driver knows exactly where to go and payment is completely cashless, okay? Very simple, very to the point. You can love or hate Uber, but they are very clear about what you can expect from them as a passenger. And in fact, they have more to say, more reasons to ride, and you can click and find out more, but they made it very clear and succinct in the kind of quick visualization of their value proposition. So this is a good example of, they could talk about a million more benefits, but they went straight to the point and are telling you the most important, okay? Here's another example of maybe a tool that you know, Trello. Trello lets you work more collaboratively and get more done. Trello's boards, lists, and cards enable you to organize and prioritize your projects in a fun, flexible, and rewarding way. Sign up, it's free. That's it. I could tell you about a million other things, but I'm not. I'm telling you about what you can expect, why you should choose me, why it's better, and off we go, okay? So I want you to start to get a sense of how simple a value proposition needs to be in order to communicate effectively. It's very easy to say a lot. It's actually a lot harder to say just the minimum to get your point across. So how do we build a value proposition? I don't love formulas. In the world of entrepreneurship and innovation, we're going to try to break formulas and rules, but in this case, it's actually helpful when you're trying to see if you've got it clear or not to use this formula. So here goes. The value proposition formula. Our product or service helps a certain type of customer who wants to get some sort of job done and reduce or avoid some sort of pain and increase or create some sort of gain, unlike the competition, which is not doing it as well as we will, okay? So that's a pretty nice basic formula that can be useful for us. Let me give you an example of one that we built out for Cinépolis VIP. So I was telling you that I worked there and we wanted to make the VIP experience even more VIP. So we had this person that we had defined. Don't worry if you can't read it here, that's not the point. But we basically defined this person called Jaime Portante. And we said, he's a VIP everywhere he goes and he wants to feel like a VIP in our cinema as well. So that's the person that we're designing for. Now, what is the value proposition? And we basically defined it as this. Our VIP cinema theater helps Jaime Portante, that's just the name that we gave to think about our VIP customer, who wants to feel important, leaving behind lines, noise, and crowds, which is a pain, and getting access to what gain is Jaime Portante looking for? Exclusive benefits and service, feeling like they're getting something super exclusive, unlike other theaters where they feel like just another number. That's something that Jaime Portante hates feeling with the competition of I'm just a number, because he's a VIP, he's super important, right? And so we want to create that feeling and sensation with him. So again, there's a million other things that I could tell you about the VIP cinema, but I kept it to the core of what is important to my user and what I'm promising to them and what they're going to get from us, okay? So again, in our document, you've got a place where you can fill out your value proposition. So I want you to go ahead and take a look at it and see if you have any questions about putting together this formula for your project. So I'll give you a few seconds to look at it, and any questions are more than welcome. It's the next slide, by the way. So let me go over here and show you where it is, just in case. It is over here. So if you downloaded or copied, it's already in your version and you just have to remove the box that I just showed you.
So Daphne, how often do you suggest us to apply such a inquiry among our customers? Depend on the line of business, Or usually you have like a metric, like let's do it every 3 months, or what will be a good number?
Yeah, that's a great question. There's not going to be a magic formula or number, but I would say definitely anytime that you're going to launch something new is a great time to check in with your customer. So if not, because what you're doing is you're flying blind, right? You're flying on autopilot and hoping that things are the same as you thought or assumed or understood before. So anytime that you're going to launch a new feature, a new product, a new brand, a new region, a new city, whatever it might be, that's a great time to say, let's check in with the user before we just go in and hope that everything is the same as before. So that's for sure. And in general, I would say anytime that you have assumptions or beliefs about your user, go and validate them. Do not stay with those assumptions or beliefs, because they can be incredibly dangerous if they're wrong. If they're wrong, they're going to lead you to that number one reason why businesses fail, right? So you might as well check in. Now, when you're in an ongoing business, like I said, there's no metric of like every 3 months you must do this. But I would say usually when we're in the startup world and entrepreneurial world, we're starting new things all the time. And so using that as an excuse to, before we launch, before we do this, let's check in, I think is a good way to make sure that you're always kind of taking the temperature and staying connected to your user. And what I find is the mistake that big companies make, which I hope you won't, is, oh, we know our customer. We've been at this for 10 years already. Our people here have, 100 years of experience if we combine everyone's experience. Like, we know this. That's dangerous. Because like I said, things continue to evolve. Your customer from a few years ago is no longer the same, right? So think about maybe what would have been a gain before, like 3-day delivery. That's a gain that our customer really appreciates and loves. Today, that's turned into a pain. Today they say 3-day delivery. Are you kidding me? And that's unfortunately, thanks to Amazon, we all expect next day, but that's the reality of the thing. The user changes and evolves, and you need to change and evolve with them. So you better check in, because that thing that you were so proud of, if we do 3-day delivery and our customer loves it, might be the thing that they're hating the most right now, right? Great. Other questions or comments? Okay, we've got one from another Anna. We have a lot of Annas. Okay. Do you recommend including their willingness to pay for something in the inter-user surveys? Would you trust these responses? Ooh, I love this question, Anna. This is such a tricky thing. Willingness to pay is something we all want to ask our users, I know, and users are terrible at responding to that question. Just yesterday, I was doing some simulations with some entrepreneurs of interviews with their customers, and we were doing some role plays. And so the person said, how much would you pay for this? And the other person, being very honest, said, I have no idea. I don't know. I mean, I've never thought about that. How am I supposed to answer that question? And so I know we always want to put that question in. And the key here is your customer cannot answer that question that way. We don't go around like putting, budgets and price tags on things throughout our lives. So that's not a realistic expectation, but you can ask questions to get to that answer. And so the questions, you need to put yourself in the mind of the user and think, what are they going to compare me to? What is the problem costing them now, right? And if you start to ask these questions that get around the issue, that they can answer. So they can say, oh yeah, well, these days, when my car breaks down, it costs me $100 to go and get it fixed. So something that would avoid my car breaking down, I would think it's worth something like that, right? Or yesterday in the simulation, when we found the user could not answer that question, we asked a follow-up question of, how would you think about how much it's worth? And the person said, this was for a networking service, so nothing to do. And the person said, I would think a bit about it like my Netflix subscription. If it's cheaper than my Netflix subscription, then it's okay. If it's more expensive, that's ridiculous. Which is maybe a stupid comparison, but it doesn't matter if it's stupid or not. The user is thinking that way. And so it's brilliant for you to figure that out and think, okay, that's a benchmark in the mind of the user. Let me see how I compare with that, and let me think how the user thinks about it. So I love your question, Anna, because I think your intuition is right. It's not a question that you can ask directly, but you can get at it through questions that are a little bit more sensitive to how the person thinks. Right? Awesome. Pilar says we get really low prices when we ask that. And sometimes even worse, you'll get very high prices. They'll tell you, oh yeah, I would pay, $200. And when the time comes, there's no one that's willing to pay $200 because they just made up a number, because we're not good at predicting that kind of stuff. So don't ask them for their opinion, ask them for facts about how their current spending works, how they think about making those purchasing decisions with other things, all those things they can tell you really good data points on that you can then use to extrapolate and say, I think that this kind of range will be okay. Now, the other thing I want to mention, today's workshop is not about this topic, but also keep in mind that you definitely need to do some prototyping, right? That's where you validate. So we're talking a lot about asking your user questions and exploring and kind of listening with empathy, super important. But at some point in your project, you also need to validate with prototypes. And the good thing about that is you're no longer asking people what they think and what their opinion is, you're asking them for action and reaction, right? So here are two potential packages. Which one do you prefer and why? Which one would you select? Those are prototypes that people can give you real reactions to, as opposed to just the opinion of, I think I would pay $200. Yeah, awesome. Any other questions on this topic of the value proposition? We have a little more time in case there are questions. Does anybody already have their value proposition defined? Adina, would you be willing to share with us? Oh, we can't hear you yet. Hold on. I can't unmute you, but.
Unmute myself.
There we go.
Okay. I'm not creating. I already deployed an app that helps market vendors in Mexico City, informal market vendors in Mexico City, reduce the pain of being outside of the digital economy by giving them a fast and easy way to digitalize themselves and sell more in an increasingly digital society where clients need digital tools to access them. Unlike everything, there is geared towards this sector of the pyramid, because as far as I know, there are very little digital options for the informal sector.
Okay, very nice. So we're going to talk a little bit more about that competition piece in a second, so I'll leave that alone. The rest of it, I think you have the elements. Obviously, with more time, it'll be good to polish a little bit the phrasing, right? So that it flows and that we can follow you. But I think you have the elements around what is painful right now, what are they trying to get done, and how can we make this easier and better for them. So I think you've got the elements. Now we can polish it and make it pretty. Very nice. Thank you for sharing, Adina. Anybody else that's working through their value proposition formula? Let's go with Irene.
Thank you. I'm going to read it. Ellie helps millennial parents who wants to break old parenting schemes, improving their parenting experience and quality and quantity of interactions with their kids. Unlike Baby Sparks, we answer their parenting questions in real time.
Very nice. Okay, love it. Clearly, I think we were all able to follow along the formula and hear the elements. Maybe the one that I wasn't sure I heard, but it could be also because you said it very quickly, was what is the pain that you are solving? Because I think I heard the job and the gain, but I'm just curious, what was the pain?
Okay, yes, I didn't see it. I didn't explain the pain because it was too long for me, but okay, I will explain it then.
Yeah, so, and then I think you're on the right track where we don't want to make it super long, so we have to clean up like the phrasing. We can do that afterwards, but for now, go ahead and put a pain, because that's when it really hits home the value proposition. It's, you're helping me do the job, you're reducing my pain, you're creating my gains, where do I sign up, right? So we want to try to communicate those points to the user. Great.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. Cecilia.
I have a question, because we want to help two different things. We want to help we have a pasaporte sanitario, and we want to help the mothers with information, whether they put the vaccine or not to their children. So it will relieve them to look for a huge amount of information. And it will also allow them to access some spaces or theaters or trips, discounts, because they have better immunology.
Right.
So it helps to get them, the child's healthier, and take decisions, informated decisions, but it gets like too long.
Yeah. So I think for now, make sure you have the elements. So again, the job should be just a few words, right, of what they're trying to do in their life. So for this one, I'm not sure if I heard it, but it could be, I think you said millennial moms or something like that, who want to keep their children safe and active or something like that, maybe would be the job, and avoid missing out on activities and get access to special discounts, unlike, like, just let's keep it simple, but let's have these key ideas here because that's what matters to the user. So I think you have the elements, and it's okay that it's a couple of things because we're kind of trying to hit home. I'm doing a lot for you. I'm going to help you do your job, reduce your pain, and increase your gain.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Thanks. Let's go with Kembi.
Hi, good morning. Good
Morning.
afternoon. So my name is Kembi. I'm the owner of Rent My Tutor. We're an online tutoring and STEM academy, right? So our value proposition is Rent My Tutor is an online tutoring and STEM academy that provides professional and individualized online tutoring services to primary and secondary school students ages 5 to 18 years.
Okay.
Oh.
So I suspect, Kembi, that you already had that value proposition, right?
Yes, that's what I have.
Yeah, and that's fine because it has some of the elements, but it doesn't have all the elements of this formula. So what I would just say is I would invite you to try out this formula because I think it's going to make your value proposition stronger. Because I heard the customer segment, it was the kids in that level of education. I heard what you guys are doing, but I wasn't sure about those other three elements, which are the heart of the value proposition. So what are they trying to get done in their lives? Like, what's the thing that's most important to them related to us? What is painful right now about the current situation? What would be a super wow for them? And what is that unlike? So I think if you add those elements, your value proposition will kind of ratchet up to the next level of, whoa, this is really hitting home for this student population.
Thank you, Daphne. Okay,
yeah.
Noted.
All right.
Great.
Thanks, Kembi. Great. Okay, I've got a couple here, questions and comments. Rogelio is asking, when you are a marketplace and serve two types of customers, or when you are in B2B to C, how do you write a brief value prop? Love it. That's a great question and super important. So if you remember, I showed you Uber's value proposition. And if you were paying attention, you should have thought, something's missing here, because it was only talking to the passengers. And what I didn't show you, but it of course exists, value proposition for the drivers, right? So Uber is a perfect example of what Rogelio was mentioning. There's two users and they have a value proposition for one and a value proposition for the other. So I would highly recommend that you think about your value proposition as your promise to the user. And so if I'm a passenger of Uber, you should be promising me one thing. And if I'm a potential driver, you should be promising me something else. There's no point in mixing them together and trying to speak to everyone with one value proposition, because that's not the way that you would present it to both of those users. So I highly recommend you have two different value propositions. And that's what I see the most often when we have these platform solutions. You can then think about creating one description of the entire platform, but it's not your promise to the user, right? Because your promise to the user, it needs to be particular to them. Remember, we understood who the person is, and then we're promising them a response to that. So you need to have one for two users, or if your platform has more than two, it's getting a little complicated, but you would have one for all the key users there. Yeah. Same thing with all of you that are not platforms. If you have two very different users or customers that are just completely different, not because one is 35 and one is 36 years old, that's not an important difference, but more like one is a small business owner and one is a huge corporate president or something like that, that's fine. They're probably different. Go ahead and do two different value proposition canvas, right? Because they're not the same, and trying to put them together is going to lead you to dilute completely the value that you're promising to them and make it so that it's the idea here is, if you're promising everything to everyone, you're not promising anything to anyone, right? So make it specific. And in fact, I know we're all about being inclusive nowadays, and that's a fantastic thing. A value proposition should be exclusive. It's okay to say, I'm promising this for these people, and other people who are not like this probably won't love our service, probably won't want to use it. That's fine. That means that you're getting specific enough and speaking to these people directly and honestly. And so some others that are not that profile are probably going to say, oh, that's not for me. An example that I'm thinking of right now is Justo, the online supermarket in Mexico, which is kind of growing exponentially right now, right? They are positioning themselves with their value proposition as, I'm not going to try to make up the definition right now because I don't have it ready, but it's something like, we are providing a fair ecosystem of grocery shopping for shoppers, providers, and the planet, something like that, right? And so for someone who cares about that, that's a really interesting and exciting value proposition. For someone else who just wants the lowest price possible for bulk purchases, that's not an interesting value proposition. I don't want to shop at that grocery store. Great. Justo doesn't want me either. I'm not their user, right? So think about when you create your value proposition, are you excluding anyone? And if you are you happy to exclude that person? If so, we're good to go. Okay, because you shouldn't be everything to everyone. All right, wonderful. Okay, let's keep going because I want to talk about the last piece of this value proposition formula, which is, let me just zip along here, which is the competition, right? How does my value proposition compare with the competition's? Here, I want you to imagine a scenario just for a second. Imagine that you are listening to a presentation of a company because you might become an ally or an investor or whatever you want, okay? You're listening to this presentation of this company. It sounds pretty amazing. You're pretty excited about the product and service that they're offering. And then in a part of their presentation, they say, and the best thing is we don't have any competition. We are the only ones doing this. What would be your reaction to that? Anybody want to share? You can put it in the chat or go ahead and unmute yourself. How would you react to that? Irene, tell us.
Yeah, thank you, Daphne. I think really, even if we have a very innovative product, we have another kind of solution that the people already is using. Then we have to understand how they are using these products or solution or services. And this is our competitors, because they are going to choose these services or products in many ways for many reasons. Then we have to understand how they are solving their problems right now.
Okay, so I gather from that, Irene, that you would not be super impressed by that claim of that company saying, we're the only ones, we have no competition. It sounds like you would be saying, I'm pretty sure you do. And I'm seeing Pilar agrees with you in the chat, very likely not true. And Anna brings another perspective, which is interesting. Maybe it's going to be a bit difficult for this product if they really are the only ones, right? And that brings me to exactly what I want you to think through. Competition is a good sign. If I hear a company tell me that they have no competition, two things. First, I think you probably didn't do your homework, just like Irene was telling us, right? You probably do have competition and you didn't really check, and I'm a bit worried about the rest of your homework that you didn't do around this company, so it doesn't give me confidence. And secondly, if it's really true that you have zero competition, it just doesn't exist, now I'm worried that you have an idea that doesn't make much sense, that you are solving a problem that no one cares about or isn't really a problem or doesn't need to be solved, right? So competition is actually a good sign. If you tell me, yeah, we've got competition, then I'm thinking, okay, good. You're not crazy. Someone else is seeing this cake or this pie and wants a piece of it, and you're going to be able to grab a piece of it too, and there's something there, right? The other thing is competition is always out there, right? So you telling me that you don't have competition is not realistic. And I'm going to tell you about a couple of the ways that you can think about that competition, because remember, it's part of your value proposition. You need to explain how are you different from that competition. So for competition, there's a couple of things we can think about. First of all, the most maybe basic one is substitutes. Here, we mean products or services that are slightly different, but they offer pretty much the same, right? So they feel somewhat identical or similar or comparable in the eyes of the consumer. Okay, so even though we think we're completely different, the consumer says, I could take this one or this other one, it's kind of the same. Here's an example. And I would love to see if someone is enough of a fan to tell me which is which of these, which are the two big hamburger companies in the world. Anybody a fan and can tell the difference? Okay, you're like me. I have no clue because I don't really eat either of these. Some people who are huge fans know exactly. For most of us, it's a substitute. I could get a burger from Burger King or from McDonald's, same. Okay, now what is important is what your customer thinks. So for some people, and here I completely disagree, some people say Coke and Pepsi, those are substitutes. I couldn't disagree more, but some people feel like it's the same. Colgate and Crest, tea and coffee, butter and margarine, the vegetable potatoes in one supermarket and the same potato in another supermarket. Same thing, I don't care, whichever it comes from, okay? So even though you don't love the idea, try to think about, is there a substitute for your product or service? Is there something that your customer would say, yeah, I could do it with you guys or with the other, it's the same. So that's the first thing to think about of competition. The next type of competition is alternatives. So here, imagine that I'm an Italian restaurant, okay? And so when I think about, for example, for couples that are dining out on Friday night, what are the alternatives? Who am I competing against? What am I competing against? Any ideas? What do you think? What's the competition? Anna in the chat says Netflix and chill. Absolutely, totally, yes. What else?
I would say other European restaurants, probably.
Okay, so other restaurants. Now, if I say other Italian restaurants in the neighborhood, that's probably a substitute, right? That's probably like, yeah, let's go to this one or this other one, I don't care. But yeah, maybe other types of restaurants, that could be an alternative. Anything else? Think back to the last time you made date plans and you considered the options. Maybe because we're in pandemic mode.
Other activities. Well, yes.
Other activities. Yes, like what?
Movies or a theater. You know.
Yeah, and I see several in the chat are saying movies. Yes. So when I was in Cinépolis and I was thinking about the VIP experience in particular, I would often think about this. Most of our clients are couples, right? That go to the movies to the VIP cinema for the experience. And I had to think about, what am I competing against? The alternative is probably going out to dinner to a restaurant. How do I compete against that? What does that mean? How do I need to position myself? And what do I need to accentuate in the experience, given that they're going to compare me against going to the Italian restaurant, right? So think about those alternatives. They're super important. My favorite analysis of competition is this last category, because everybody always forgets about it, except Irene that mentioned it in some way. And it is the status quo. The status quo is usually your biggest competition, right? Whatever your user is currently doing, you need to figure out how to fight against that. And it's a hard fight. So I don't know if anybody can recognize this product that I'm showing you here. It became popular like a few years ago, I would say. It's these silicone covers, right, for our food. Here's my question to you. What is the status quo that they are competing against? Think about what's going on in your fridge. Jessica.
Yeah, like it could be from foil paper to plastic to a bag to, you know, pretty much any other material.
Yeah, and in the chat, we're getting some great responses. Tupperware, reuse yogurt containers. Those are probably the hardest competition for this company, right? Ziploc. So yeah, think about what's going on in your current status quo of your fridge. And it probably looks something like this. My favorite status quo competitor of these guys is a plate and a bowl and a plate, and it's a tower and it's perfectly stable as long as nobody touches it, right? And that's how we are conserving our food in the fridge. And so this company arrives and says, hey, that's not a good way to keep your food. We've got a better way, right? And they have to convince us that what we've been doing for, 50 years is not ideal and that there's a better way to do it. By the way, I have to confess, they convinced me. And I have now these silicone covers to cover my food, right? I feel a bit silly because the status quo was working perfectly fine, but they were able to convince me that there was a better way, right? So you have to think about, even if you are in the lucky situation of there's no actual business or company that has a solution like yours, there is a status quo. The status quo is the current situation. And it could be, I don't do anything to solve my problem. And you're going to come here and tell me that I should pay for something to solve the problem that right now I don't pay for. That's a tough sell, right? So you better be clear on what value you're adding comparing to the status quo. Adriana asked, do they work? Well, that is a great question because I'm still debating what the value proposition was. I think in some ways it was don't waste foil and plastic. So on the environmental side, I would say yes, it works. Does it work better than the Tupperware lid that every Tupperware ever comes with? No, they're not really necessary to replace that. So I'm still a little bit torn, but they convinced me enough to make the sale. Whether I am a champion and a promoter now, that's a different story. The verdict is still out for me. I don't know what everyone else thinks of these guys, but they have a tough battle and they're actually doing pretty well. Okay, how are you going to present this competitive analysis? Well, if you're comparing it for your customers, you could do something like this, right? You've seen these kinds of comparative tables before where it's like, here's us, here's the other ones. And look, we do all these other things that the competitors aren't doing. So we have more value in our value proposition, given what's important to you, right? So that's a nice way to present it. Here's another example, right? Comparison tables where we're saying, look, if you're looking for these things, which according to me, you are, because I did all those interviews with you and I understand what you care about and I did my surveys and whatever, then look, we're the best option for these reasons, right? Make your user's decision as easy as possible. It's a win-win for everyone if you help them make the comparison that anyway they are going to make, even if you don't participate in it, all right? So are there questions or comments on this aspect of considering our competition? I don't have a template for you here because this is very individual to each company and organization. But the point is, think about substitutes, alternatives, and the status quo. I would be very interested in hearing maybe from a few of you, what are your competitors? What do you consider your competitors? And if you get creative, what are the competitors that maybe you hadn't thought of before? For example, the status quo. Anybody want to share what their status quo enemy is right now? Anybody? Don't be shy. Adina, yeah. I was actually curious about yours because you mentioned it when you shared.
No, and thinking about it, my status quo enemy is WhatsApp. Because vendors now get their digital access to sales is through WhatsApp. So my status quo enemy or my status quo obstacle is WhatsApp.
Absolutely. Yeah. And that's a formidable competitor that you're going to have to think about. How do you add more value and what are the potential pains that there are with WhatsApp? There's a lot of gains with WhatsApp, but what are the pains and what are some gains that you can add that WhatsApp just can't do, right? Yeah. And that's where you're going to build your robust value proposition, because just saying like, yeah, some people use WhatsApp, but I'm proposing this, that's not going to be a good strategy. It should be, I know they're comparing me with WhatsApp. Let me help them with the comparison.
And I also have another status quo alternative, which is pen and paper, which sounds easy to beat, but the more ingrained the way of living, the more ingrained the solution is to the way of life, the harder it is to beat. So
absolutely,
pen and paper are notebooks are a great competitor for me.
Totally, yeah. And I want to commiserate with you and share how challenging that is, so that everyone can think about that status quo. As I said, the first company that I worked with in Mexico was a startup called Frog Tech, technology startup, and they were looking to modernize small mom and pop shops, so tiendas de abarrotes, with a system, a point of sale system, right? And so our status quo competition and enemy was just like you, Adina, it was the notebook, la libreta. And it was so painful to convince them that the notebook wasn't good enough, because their response was, we have been using it for 40 years and look at what we've done with it. What's the problem? What are you trying to solve? And so we had a really hard time thinking about, okay, let's think about those pains. There are some pains with the notebook, and what gains can we create that the notebook just can't do? They're there, but if you don't explicitly develop them and talk through them with the user, they don't make that connection all by themselves. You shouldn't just assume it's obvious just because one is fancy and technological and the other is basic and old and boring. People love basic, old, and boring, right? So it's hard to fight against, for sure. Thank you for sharing that, Alina. Let's see. I've got some other input here in the chat. The Workly team. Do you want to share this with your mic, or do you want me to read it out? You tell me. Read it? Okay, here we go. We provide outsourcing for companies, or they can choose a skilled individual from across the Caribbean through our online platform. Our competition, I would say, are companies who prefer to hire the traditional way and not online. How do we work around this? Yeah, so I think now that we've taken the example that a notebook can be your competition, pen and paper, everything else is easier than that, right? So what I would say for the Workly team is think through what we just said. What are the pains of doing it the traditional way right now? What are the things that are not optimal? They're loving it and it's working great, but there's a few things that aren't ideal, probably. And what are the gains that you can add that traditional way just can't do? And that's the kind of conversation that you should be having with your users of, I know that you're doing fine and that this is good enough, but there's some issues here that maybe you didn't realize. Let me put them on the radar for you. And there's some things that you could be getting, some opportunities for gains that you're just not getting with your current solution, right? Going back to the value prop. Okay, and then with Pilar, we have, how do you know what type of competitors you should focus on? As a small brand, should you choose the easiest one or considering 3 types from the beginning? Okay, great question. What I would say is, I'm not the person who's going to tell you that. The person who's going to tell you that is your user, right? Go to your user and figure out what they are thinking about as a solution to your problem, because that's the only thing that matters. And in fact, it would be very silly to think of a competitor and compare yourself and all that, and the user say, oh, I didn't even know those guys existed. Thanks for putting them on my radar, right? That's not what we're trying to do. So what we're trying to do is, I know you're thinking about these competitors and alternatives. Let me explain and compare and help you think through why we're better, right? Cecilia says, my business resolves some issues the government should, but they are not agile or secure enough. They should be cheaper. Okay. Cecilia, tell us more.
As I told you, I'm working with vaccines registration. So I'm working on health and improve the distribution, because you're getting information out of the registers. So government should attend these issues, but they are not working as fast in technology. So in some point, I'm trying to solve issues that the government should, and we get the competition with them. And I say it's cheaper in the first view because at the end we all pay for that, but it seems to be free.
Yeah, so that's always a tough one when you're competing against the public sector or around something that should and could be free, right? That's definitely an interesting challenge. I would always go back to this analysis that we're doing of what are the pains, what are the gains, and also thinking about, in this case, how can maybe that competitor in some way can be an ally, right? So when we think about the ecosystem that we're working in, if the government solution is suboptimal or not working, maybe they can consider us an ally to fixing that problem, right? Maybe one of our users or allies is the same government system that isn't working. Potentially, depends on if they're open to having conversations about it, right? Okay, fantastic. So in the interest of time, let me keep pushing forward. Just to remind you some questions that you need to think through in order to guide your value proposition development. Who is this value proposition for? That is step one. If you don't know who it's for, there's no point in defining what it is, okay? Once we know the who, which is, remember, that first half of that canvas that we were working through, right? Then, do I understand the pains, the gains, and the jobs of that user? Am I clear on that? If I'm still not quite sure, that's totally fine. Let's go and check. Let's go and ask them, right? Next point, am I proposing pain relievers and or gain creators that matter to my user? The worst situation you can be in is offering something that people's response to is, meh, I could do without that, right? That's not the situation you want to be in. We often say it's much easier and better to sell aspirin than vitamins. Aspirin solves a problem, which is a headache, which people suffer through and say, how can I get rid of this headache? And vitamins are a nice to have that you take for a long time and hopefully see some benefits from, right? If you can try to position yourself as aspirin, you're going to have a much better time than trying to say, I know you don't care about this, I know it doesn't matter, and I know it doesn't hurt, but go ahead and take this, please, right? That's a tougher sell. It's a push, and it's a very heavy push, okay? Is this value proposition different, unique, and better than the competition? And have I understood all the aspects of the competition, from substitutes, alternatives, to the infamous status quo? Am I presenting the value proposition in a clear way that my user will understand and maybe even repeat? The ideal situation is that your value proposition looks, feels, and sounds like something that they themselves would say, right? That's the most best sign that you are having a really compelling value proposition, because it's something that when they turn to their neighbor and explain what you guys are up to, they say it with the same words. That means that you're speaking their language. And you probably know this framework, the business model canvas, right? It's from Lean Startup. Basically, it's a way with one view to kind of see, what is my business model? How does it all fit together? Instead of writing a 100-page document about my business model, which nobody does anymore. So with this view, I just want to remind you, in case you have seen it before, the first two boxes that you have to fill out are customer segments and value propositions, which is exactly what we've been looking at today. If you don't have those clear, I really don't want to hear about, or nor do I care about, how you're going to make money and who your partners are and what your activities are. Those two have to be super solid before we move on to see how the rest of the boxes fit together. All right. So I want to see if we have comments or questions. We have a few minutes to work through those. I'll open up the forum to you. Feel free to just remove your mic, your mute. I would love to hear from you directly, but if you would rather the chat, that's fine too. Comments or questions on this whole topic or a value proposition. And if you want to go beyond it, that's fine too. Whatever you guys have as questions. Am I going to share the presentation? Ask Irene. Yes, I can do that. And I understand that there's also going to be a recording. Other?
Daphne, yes.
Yeah.
What is your take on, I know, and I totally agree that having competition is good. It's a good sign, right? And it makes you be better as well. What about partnerships with your competitors?
Yeah,
what is your take on?
I think it's a very interesting tactic. As I was saying with the example of the government, which maybe isn't a good example because I don't have all the context, but sometimes your potential competitor could be an ally if you think about, oh yeah, okay, I'm offering half of the value, but they're offering the other half. It doesn't make sense to try to build out what each other has. We should be combining forces. I think what applies there is, how do we get to win-win agreements where we're bringing value to the table and they are as well, and so we're both receiving value, right? Nobody's doing each other any favors. But there's some really interesting things that you can do around referrals, for example, right? So yeah, you did the first part of the process with me, dear customer, and now for the second half, I'm going to recommend you to my ally who takes care of this other part that I don't cover. Like, I think that it can be very interesting to think of proactively instead of, yeah, we don't do that, so let's see, they'll figure it out on their own. How can we have alliances where people refer to me and I refer back, and we create a virtuous cycle of traffic in and out? But it's going to very much depend on where you're at, what your project is, and who those allies could be. I think it's helpful to do something like a stakeholder mapping, where you map out the players and then you figure out, is there anyone here who we could be friends with, right? People who do the exact same thing as us, I don't think that they're going to turn into allies. If anything, we might get folded into them, or they might get folded into us, but I wouldn't consider that allies, right? But if there's some area where we're not completely overlapped, I think that's an opportunity for allies. Awesome. Let's see. Okay. Any other questions? Yeah, Pilar.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for a very informative talk. I like it a lot. One question about your different users. We have been done research for quite a long time, and we already identified two specific type of users, and both of them are like important for our brand. At what point should we just focus on one in order to like grow and try to meet the specific, very, very specific needs of one, and just left the other aside, even if it's important and had some potential? What is your suggestion?
That's a very good question, Pilar, and a tough one to answer theoretically. I'll give you some thoughts on it. Usually in the early days of a project, when I see that entrepreneurs have 2 potential users, most of the time, my recommendation is going to be focus. Just focus, because it's so hard to put all of this together and to make things happen. Having ideas is really easy, but then making them happen, as you all know, because you're in the thick of it, that's the hard part. And so diluting yourself between 2 users is usually something I'm a bit worried about in the early days. And so usually I would say, let's focus, let's choose one, let's make a bet and let's focus. And hopefully if we do really good hard work for a certain amount of time, we can have a timeline where in 6 months, we will be opening it up to this other type of user. We will turn around and look at this other user. So that's going to be my usual recommendation. I think that strategy, one of my favorite definitions of strategy is it's the things that you decide not to do. And I think we forget that too much. And we think about all the things that we do want to do. And as entrepreneurs, I know you all have a list of like 35 things that people have asked you for, suggested, or ideas that you have had. Now your job as the entrepreneur is, I'm not going to do this. I'm not going to do this. I'm going to focus on this. So that would be my usual recommendation. My first exception would be if we have that platform situation that I think Rogelio was telling us about. If the value comes from having both users and user A is not going to want to be on the platform or in the service or whatever it is, if user B isn't there, then that's not an option. And platform businesses are very challenging and super interesting because of that, because you have to go for both at the same time. But if that's not the case for you, my first recommendation would be, let's focus. Which one to focus on? I think there what can be useful is to think about the theory of early adopters, which maybe you guys have seen before, where it's a curve of adoption of products or services or technology. If you haven't seen it, go ahead and look for it. It's fascinating. And it basically tells us that there's a certain segment of the population that is going to be more easily attracted to new products, services, technology, and that there's other people that are going to be super slow to adopt anything and want to make sure that everyone else has tried it before they give it a try. So obviously, if you're able to profile your 2 users somewhere on that spectrum, go for the early adopters. Go for the people that are going to be a little bit less difficult to convince so that you can get some of that traction, and then you can bring along those people that are laggards, as they're called. Hopefully that's quite helpful. Yeah. Great. Anybody else for a last comment or question? All right, I'll be paying attention to the chat in case anybody has. I want to close off on time and be super respectful of your time. So thank you so much for all your time and your attention and your energy today. Thank you for sharing your projects, super interesting stuff that you're working on. Remember, this is not rocket science. You're already thinking about your value proposition, but making it explicit and working through it, simplifying it and getting back to the basics is something you should do all the time to not forget. All right, so I'm leaving here my LinkedIn in case you want to follow me there. I try to publish things related to this topic all the time. And we've got a QR code for you, one more QR code with a feedback link that we would love to get your feedback on. And with that, I will turn it back over to the organizers.
Thank you, Daphne. Thanks all for joining us. Also, thank you to our partners, Collective Academy and We Exchange, for making this possible. Actually, we're having Mariana from Collective Academy that want to share with us a few words.
Thank you, love Daphne and Melissa. Daphne, could you give me, thank you, space for sharing my screen? Perfect. So I know that you have been having information, who we are and what we do. Just a little bit overview. We said to ourselves that we are a new university and our main service is the MBT. And well, what are the core skills that we have on the MBT are the part of tech leadership, business innovation, and core skills. For us, core skills are what normally it's called soft skills, but really are the core skills to be a leadership. And we have a special scholarship for all the women entrepreneurs in this program. So if you tap to Edmundo collectiveacademy.com, altcollectiveacademy.com, you could ask him for this kind of information for the scholarship for women of this program. And you just said that you are part of this excellent program from Central. So thanks a lot, Melissa and Daphne, and a lot for your questions and information. All of this we will share with you about the details, and I will also share with you early adopters for post-work if you would like to read an article about it. So big hugs and have fun. And really, it's a really good Canvas, so you could use it really good.
Thank you, Mariana. Thank you all. We also send you a feedback form. Please fill it. It's really important for us to know your opinion. And don't forget to follow us on Facebook and YouTube to rewatch this content and subscribe to all the great content that we'll be uploading. And that's it. See you next week.